Welcome to Landlord Diaries, where we talk about midterm rentals and the opportunities behind them. We'll share landlord stories, talk about maximizing investment potential, and discuss how to live the very best landlord life. This podcast is proudly brought to you by Furnished Finder, the place for everything midterm rentals. Remember to like and subscribe if you enjoy our content.
We are live with the Landlord Diaries, and just a reminder, thank you so much for listening. This is Kelly Bailey, your host from the Austin, Texas area, who is an avid midterm rental host. And we have our marketing director, Katie Lyon, who we are so happy to have as our co-host. So Katie, what do you think about today's episode with Isaac?
Today's episode was so great, and Isaac really has a very unique perspective because he's not only an investor, but he's also a lender. So just being able to pick his brain for a little bit about like all the different lending options and what he thinks about interest rates, and just he's got so much creativity in with his strategy. It was just so cool to get to talk to him. So I really encourage everyone that's thinking about investing or looking for other options for lending to take a listen. Also, please everyone remember that our podcast is brought to you by Furnished Finder. Furnished Finder is the largest market for midterm rentals, and there are no booking fees on the platform. So you can go ahead and pay exactly the price you see, and you don't have to worry about any crazy fees that sneak up on you.
So nice.
Enjoy!
Hey everybody, today's guest, Isaac Sanchez, is with us from the Bay Area, California. Isaac owns BayCal Capital and has 12 years of experience in the buying, selling, and lending aspects of the real estate business. Isaac has 6 rentals on Furnished Finder, currently with a great strategy in mind of buying homes with detached garages that he can convert into ADUs. We will also cover some creative lending options today as well. So let's jump in. How are you, Isaac?
Pretty good. How about yourself?
Doing great. Thanks for coming on the show. I think I'd like to, jump into your expertise first, which is part of the lending side, because we've got so many people nowadays that just, they maybe they don't have a job or they want to go full time with real estate, but then they have a hard time qualifying. So what are some of those options out there?
Well, most people know like the normal loans that the government gives you, the FHA or conventional. But let's just say there's full-time investors. They want to quit their day job, but they're scared that they're not going to qualify to purchase more property. They actually have a lot of there's another market out there that understands that there's this clientele out there that are really good at, good scores, they pay their bills, so it makes for a good client. So there's a loan called a debt service cover ratio, and all that is basically the underwriting super easy because they just care that the house to debt service. So if you're just using some random numbers here, if your total mortgage is $1,500 and the rent that you receive is $1,500, you qualify. Now, some places are going to want you to have reserves. Typically, it's between 3 to 6 months of reserves. And that's pretty much it. Other places will be a little bit more aggressive and let you, let's say the house only is 0.75 of a ratio. So instead of 1-for-1, it's a little bit off of covering the total debt.
Mm-hmm.
They'll allow it.
Okay.
Now these rates come a little bit higher than you would for conventional. But it's a good way to get in the market, and if you know your numbers pretty well, it's a pretty good strategy. Typically, you have to put 20% down, but some places will allow for 15. So you would have to know your numbers pretty well to make sure that, hey, I'm pretty sure this is going to rent for X amount.
And will you need to show a 12-month lease, or is that one of those that you can show midterm strategy and profit?
So that's On the purchase side, they're gonna go off of what the appraiser is gonna go off of. So they're gonna do what they call like a rental survey, and then they'll say, okay, this is what we estimate. Now you can argue it. There are new loans that are starting to catch up with their short term, midterm. So as the investors are learning about that in their side, so then they're like more lenient, and they might go off of off of other comparables that are that. But
Hmm.
at this point, they are out there, but there are not that many that will go off of a short term Airbnb or a midterm. However, once you've proven it for a year and you're looking to refinance, let's say rates drop, then you're good because now you can say I have proof that this is what it is with those what they call non QM, so non qualified mortgage, which is basically just not a conventional or FHA loan.
Awesome.
Now, have you used these for any of your properties?
My properties, I typically just go conventional because I do show all my income on my tax returns. I do encourage my clients when I look at it, let's see first if we can go conventional. And if not, then we'll try these other routes. And then some people, though, want them just because it starts to get kind of hairy once you own X amount of properties and they don't want to deal with all the paperwork.
Right.
There's another program too for self-employed people where they'll just go off for their bank statements. And on that program, if it's owner occupied,
Which one? What's the name of that one?
they call it just a bank statement loan. And so they'll just, what they typically do is, let's say you have somebody, an agent, a real estate agent, right? So they can go off of their bank statements and look at them like, okay, and then what the standard is, they'll take 50% of the total gross deposits. But somebody like a real estate agent, like, hey, my to do my business, I really don't need that much. So if they can get like a tax letter saying, hey, their expense for their business is like only 20%, then they'll use 80% of the bank statements.
All right, Isaac. So far we've got for those properties that have a year under their belt, then it's, you're good to go with a lot of different options. What about the properties that maybe you have a couple midterms, but you don't have a year under your belt on this new property you're looking to buy? What options do they have to qualify and secure that property?
So now under the DSCR loan, um,
Hmm.
some of them will want experience, but for the most part, you're fine as long as you have the down payment and they see that the rental survey. Now, some of them, like even if you don't have any rental experience, it just depends on your situation. So, like, let's say you only have one house that you live in, and now you want to get into the investment world. Um, I always recommend that we look to see if we can qualify you conventional because even though rates are higher, they're still pretty good and they're going to be a lot better than you would with the non QM. And a lot of times,
Okay.
if you can qualify for your house that you bought, most often you're going to qualify for your investment property because you're not going to buy a house that's going to be too negative, right? So in that case too, you could be a lot more negative because you're in your mind, hey, I'm going to Airbnb it, or midterm it, which you're going to get more of a profit margin. So on paper, it might not
Hmm.
look good, but to them, all they care is like, do you have the ability to pay this loan on the conventional side? So
Mm-hmm. I know
Okay.
we just went through a similar situation. We bought an investment property and the appraisal report for the rent showed about half of what we could actually get for the
yeah,
rent.
Mm.
So in our minds, we had a lot of padding because we were counting on that higher number for rent. But we still qualified for the loan because, like you said, they're just making sure that you can cover that gap.
yeah. So that's with conventional
Awesome.
or the bank statement program. So the debt service ratio wouldn't be the DSCR one wouldn't work in that situation because they have nothing else to look at. But with her scenario, they're like,
Right.
okay, you have X amount of income. So even though there's a $500 arbitrary number shortfall, you guys can cover that shortfall.
Like you can handle that.
Yeah.
Right.
So then you're good. So a lot of
But
times,
the biggest downfall with the conventional mortgage, The biggest downfall that I've found with the conventional mortgage is the endless paperwork.
Yeah, that's so I always try to like let people, and it depends too on the situation. Like every time you see like people bragging about closing these big lenders, it's because if it's a cookie cutter deal, then yeah, it's super easy. But once you have people that have multiple properties, or they
Right.
change multiple jobs, or they get commission, and it's like, and there's just these weird things that we have to clarify for the underwriter. It gets a little hairy,
But
but
like,
we'll get it
it's a
done.
part of it, right?
Yeah.
Like, yeah. I mean, you go into it, you're never going to like apply for a conventional mortgage thinking I'm going to turn in one application and I'm all set. Like there's always going to be more documents they want.
And once you get better at it, you can have a whole folder of all your stuff, and then that way, for the next property, it's ready to rock and roll. And then one good thing I want to touch bases on
That's a
That's a
really
good
good
point.
idea.
is the on the appraisal survey, they're just going to go off of the current rental comps. You could argue it, but some places are harder to argue than others. So it could be like, hey, this area uh, hasn't had that much turnover, so therefore they're basing their rents off of somebody that rented it out 5 years ago. And they'll try to contact the property management sometimes, but sometimes they're just going to be like, oh, okay, we saw that it rented out for 1,000, but in reality you can get 1,500. I had that happen to us when we purchased my property here in Oakland with the 3 unit. Um, the rents were super low because it's even harder here in Oakland because there's rent control. So they're not going to compare it to an apartment complex. They're going to compare it to another property that's similar to yours, like a multi-unit. And the multi-units are in rent control. A lot of them, well, all of them. But so if they can't find an updated uh, place that's just been rented, they're going to use the comps from all these rent controlled apartments. Well, I should say places, multi-units. So,
Right.
and it just brings down the overall rent. And you're like, man, I know I can rent this thing for like 2,500, and I'm only getting 1,500.
Right. So Isaac, let me ask you this. I know with rates what they are today, and like you said, like still not awful, but a lot of people have low interest rates locked in on their primary residence or other property, whatever, and they want to try to, use the lowest rate they can get. So what are some options for them to kind of take advantage of that rate that they do have locked in?
So I would definitely look into second mortgages. You're going to get a higher rate with the second mortgage just because they're taking more risk. Um, Now, this one is just you have to qualify. So if you can't show income, then it's not going to work, unfortunately. But if you can show income, it's a great strategy because you can keep your 2.875 or whatever you got and take out a line of credit or just take out a second mortgage that's a fixed rate. So same thing, they'll say, hey, here's $100,000. You can have it for 15 or a 30-year fix. But the beautiful thing about the line is you can reuse it. The only rub about the line, it's a variable, just like your credit cards. But I do encourage people to look at the numbers first because right now I have a client right now. His first mortgage is pretty low. It's like 170, which is low in California. So
Wow.
170, and he wanted to borrow 80,000, but he didn't want to touch his first. So I was telling him, hey, in reality, you're better off refinancing the whole thing because once you do what they call the blended average, basically taking your balance and your balance and your rate of your first mortgage and the balance and the rate of your soon to be second mortgage, there's an average of a rate that you're paying. And if that rate is higher than what you could get
Right.
if you just refinance the whole first, then you know, hey, I'm better just doing the first. Because right now, a lot of people are like, no, I want to keep that
Okay.
3%. And it's like in reality, if you're going to use that money, depending on what the balance
That
is,
much,
yeah.
right.
So you want to run your numbers.
I think the last question from me for the lending topic would be what about like HELOCs or things of that nature for new lines of credit?
So I really like lines of credit. Some people are scared of them. I would
Hmm.
just my rule of thumb on line of credit is what are you going to use the money for? If you're going to use it to purchase new investment properties, then I think it's a great thing. If it's if you're going to use the money because you already know you need the money, like, hey, we got to, fix the house up and our contractor says it's going to be 80,000, then I think you're probably better off just taking a home equity fixed loan. The reason being is because they are variable.
Okay.
So, if you already know you're going to have to use this money, go ahead and lock it up and secure the rate. Now, if you're comfortable with the line, I still like it. I
Right.
still use construction for my line of credit, but I think that's a good rule of thumb. And then for the line of credit, you'll have this money that you can access to say, hey, I found this investment property, I want to buy it. Now you can just write the down payment, but you're not being charged for it while it's not being used. So it's just like a credit card. So it's connected to the prime rate. A lot of people don't realize that their credit cards are variable. Like, nobody really reads all the disclosures. So it's connected to prime.
Right.
So if you look at that, you're like, no, I'm scared about the variable. I'm like, well, do you have credit cards? Yeah. Well, you already have a variable.
Right.
But I think the line's
Cool.
a great way to use to purchase more property because a lot of people are like, well, I don't want to use it right now because I haven't really secured a property. Well, by the time you find the property that you want to buy, it's going to take too long to get the line
Right.
set up to buy the new house.
That's Katie, anything else for this section?
I don't think so. I will just attest to a HELOC. We used one to put a down payment on our latest property, and it really was like smooth sailing, and we felt really good about it. And we're like, we're taking this, but we're investing it, and I don't know, like it does feel like, I think, like you said, like when you're using it for the right choice, it's a very logical use of it. And it's nice that, it's like you said, it's a line of credit, right? So you're paying on what you're using, and then it's like it's there. It's kind of like a reserve fund at the same time.
People talk about their equity, but if you're not going to sell your property, what's
Right. I'd rather have it doing something.
Exactly, actually working for you. And
so I know that, like, yes, we're paying, like you said, like the prime rate on the HELOC, but are we making more than that with the investment property? Yeah. So it's, it's kind of a no-brainer.
And then the other cool thing about line of credits, typically most of them, they're just going to charge you the interest only payment. Now, you don't want to get accustomed to paying that. But if you have a hard month, or, you're kicking a tenant out or whatever it might be, at least, you have that low payment, and then you can kind of like have more of a handle of it. Like, okay, cool. This month I'm just going to pay the interest only payment, but next month, I find it a good rule of thumb to try to pay whatever the interest is, double it. That way you're attacking the principal.
That's a good idea.
And the other cool thing is, if something bad happens, like you're laid off, you have the line to access. Nobody's in it. Yeah. So it's hard to get, as we discussed earlier, it's hard to get a loan when you're not working. So the line of credit is there if or let's say they, okay, you want to just jump into being a full-time investor. Well, now you already have the line set up.
Right. And it gives you that, it lets you actually use your equity in your house and do something with it and invest with it, rather, like you said, it's just sitting there. So
yeah. Now sometimes, just word of caution, like when we have crazy times, like say with COVID or when 2008 happened, they do have the right to cut your line, but that's just some very rare situations.
Okay. So your disclaimer.
Yeah. It just depends. So like when COVID happened, people were losing some people were losing their jobs. And I know my sister was kind of like on the fence, and I told her, hey, you might want to take your line, because if this thing gets really bad, they might cut your line. So better to take the money out now. If you don't need it and everything's okay, then you can throw it back in. If it turns out that you need it, then you already have the money, because you don't want to get that letter like, oh, I was planning to use that.
Right. That's a really good idea.
Yeah, so many great ideas that you've shared so far. Wow. I think this is going to be super valuable on the lending side for those that are considering their options. And then you have such expertise in another area as well, and that is your specialty of finding homes with detached garages. So That is pretty cool. So we're going to transition to landlord logistics. And first off, because they are real estate and lending for your company, what are those keywords like for someone that's not in the real estate business wanting to constantly watch properties that pop up on the market? If they're doing a keyword search on Zillow, or want to give their agent the best way to find a property for them, what are some of those keywords for finding ADUs or detached garages?
So I would definitely work with an agent that at least knows about it,
Hmm.
so then they can
Mhm.
see stuff from the get, like, oh, this will work. So
Okay.
y- you can write ADU because right now a lot of agents are starting to realize, like, hey, that's a great selling point. So even though the
Right.
Hmm.
property doesn't have an ADU, they'll say you can build an ADU.
Yes. Uh-huh.
So, like, for instance, our triplex that we're selling right now, I've already did the plans for the new buyer. Like, here, you can
Oh,
do an
that's
ADU out of the
thoughtful.
garage. You're ready to rock and roll.
Hmm.
Also, look for in-law unit, studio, because there's always these properties that somebody already did the work for you, but it's not classified as a two unit. You want to check if they have permits, but sometimes some people did it without permits and they did a really good job. That'll be up to you to decide whether it's up to your liking.
Hmm.
Because to build one, it gets a little pricey, and that's why I started looking at places that are already have like a detached garage, because that's
Okay.
going to save so much in your construction cost. And then another
That's
thing
good
to look
advice.
at too. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
That's good advice.
So another thing to look at too is how close is that detached garage from the main property, because you're gonna have to do a sewer line there, right? So that can cost a lot of
Ah.
money as well.
I was just gonna
Okay.
ask, a garage and a house are so different, and I can imagine having the skeleton there, right, is a huge advantage, but just thinking about all the mechanics and the water and the sewer and all of that stuff has to be a challenge.
Yeah, so sometimes you'll have people that have their laundry units in the garage already.
Mm.
So now you already have the water plumbed. So that's a huge savings.
Yeah, that's
Um,
huge.
yeah,
Hmm.
and over here in California, everything's expensive. So it
Hmm.
saves a lot of money. And the way I learned was just trial and error. And I was like, oh, okay. Because my original plan, I had this big backyard in my investment property, and I was going to throw a manufactured unit back there. Um, but the city didn't let me because the garage was in the way. And I
Mm.
go, what if I just take out the garage? And she's like, no, you have to replace it. You have to tell us how you're going to replace it. And I'm like, well, that's going to be way too expensive. And she's like,
Right.
and she was the one that gave me the idea of like, well, why don't you make the garage into a studio? And I was like, oh, I go, well, it's too small because it was only a one car garage. And I was
Ting.
like, okay, yeah, I'll just build up on it. And then when she told me that, I'm like, okay, great. Now I'm going to only look for 2 car garages because that's
Right.
the decent size.
I feel like a two-car garage is a decent sized studio.
Well, the original one I had was a 1 car, so it was like only
Yeah, that's a
300.
little tight.
Yeah, so I had to build on. That's what made it more pricier. But from
Right.
there, I learned a lot, and I was like, okay, that's really great. And then you want to talk to your your city building permit office to find out what their rules are. But a
Okay.
lot of municipalities right now are being really relaxed on the rules. I know in California, they did a whole state, like, I mean, you still have to meet the city rules, but for the most part, they try to streamline it because they want you to build these properties,
Okay.
Right.
and make it easier so you're not like caught with all the red tape of, because a lot of places used to require that you have parking made for that
Mm.
ADU, and now that's not a requirement. Well, for most places.
Okay.
Awesome.
So how do you split the space between the main house and the ADU to make sure that travelers feel like they have enough privacy, or if they have pets or whatnot, that they're not like on top of each other? Like, is there like a baseline that you make sure that they have X amount of space or whatnot?
Yeah, so what I do, and then I actually had a client that we were looking for the same situation for him too. So sometimes it's already made for you. You want to see, like, okay, if I'm coming in here and I'm a traveling nurse, I'm driving in the park, I can have the right side of the driveway. You can let both people know,
Okay.
hey, they're going to park on the right side. And then just think about it like, if they're, you always want to keep that in mind, and you always want to keep that, like, hey, this person's going to work different hours. So kind of have an idea, like we don't want to wake up, the main house or vice versa.
Right.
Like keep it quiet. So on the one that I first did, I did like a little fence separating because it's in the backyard, so it separates her backyard, so it gives us some kind of privacy. And then I extended the driveway so that the nurse could park on the right hand side, and I made her own entrance from the backyard to
Okay,
get
that's
in.
smart.
So and then there's some things you don't think about. Like again, it's an always learning process. Like somebody asked me, "Hey, where can I get my mail?" And I go, "Oh." It's like, I didn't think
Right.
about
Some things you don't think about.
So I put a little mailbox there, and so that worked out. But it's just little stuff that you didn't even think about, and you're like, "Oh, okay, that's right."
Right.
I'm like, "Oh."
But did you have to actually go to the post office and create another mailbox, or you just put a mailbox and added a person
So
to the
it
house?
actually, when you do the ADU, now I don't know about other states, but you actually get your own address,
Okay.
Okay.
and so I just put the mailbox, put the address there, and we're good to go. And then I have
Okay.
another duplex that already had a studio, and that that also that she was the lady that told me, and that it didn't have a mailbox specifically for the studio, and it was way in the back.
Mhm.
So I was like, oh, okay, I'm sorry, let me put one in there, and I just put the address and studio in the back, and then that resolved that problem. But it's kind of interesting that
Nice.
little stuff like that, or some people don't even bring it up, and then some random person brings it up, and you're like, oh, I didn't think about that. Okay,
Yeah.
Mhm.
that's a good
Right.
idea.
That makes sense.
Or like maybe like I was also thinking about having like a container with a lock on it, so that
Uh-huh.
some of them get their Amazon stuff because they are there for
Oh yeah.
for a while, and they work a
Mhm.
lot of hours. So you
Right.
want to have them secure um, their stuff. I actually
Mhm.
sometimes will send Amazon stuff to them. Makes everybody's life easier.
Me too.
Yeah.
I
It
think
really
that's
does. So what are your profit margins like?
so. I checked on that question. So the reason why I wasn't able to really answer it last time is because I have some in construction and ready to be rented. So right
Mhm.
now I'm getting about on average $800 a property.
Okay.
So I think I
That's
could up those
fantastic.
margins a little bit more. Um, but I'm still, it's an always learning process. And I'm like, okay, let me stretch it out. And plus, if I think it's just because a lot of it kind of shares off Airbnb too. Like you want to have good reviews, and they are coming
Hmm.
from afar, so they don't really know your area, or sometimes there's a bad stigma about a certain area. So
Mhm.
you would have to let them know, like, hey, and I'm always honest. So I have some places that are really nice areas, some places that are just okay, but it's like walking distance to the hospital.
Mhm.
So I just let them know, like, hey, this is how I feel. I mean, it's my opinion, so
Mhm.
it's totally up to you what you're comfortable with. And that's what kind of makes it hard too, because they really don't have any time to come check it out.
Right.
So I try to do like a little video route like of the block, just so they
Awesome.
could see that and they get a feel. Because where I have a majority of my places in Stockton, Stockton kind of gets a bad rap. Um, and it's just, just like any city, there's bad areas.
Mhm.
Right.
So, so I have, I have one person I'm supposed to meet, not meet, but talk, video call today, so they can see the house, and feel comfortable about the whole area. I mean, I gave them
Mhm.
the video already, but I'm like, okay, yeah, I'll be in
Mhm.
town, so I can do that for you.
And how do you make your videos so that they're professional and look good for anyone interested?
So on the videos, I'm planning to. Right now, we just did it. To be honest with you, just the iPhone, and it was more
Hmm.
just for logistic purposes. But then we also did one. I had my assistant do it. She did a pretty good job. I mean, the lighting's not the greatest, but she put like a
Mhm.
little music in the background. And when she sent it to me, I was like,
Yes.
"Oh, that was pretty cool. Good work." So,
Good.
so she did a walk around the studio, and that's been helping a lot too. Because now I just shoot that out with whoever's interested. Because
Mhm.
sometimes they don't understand the layout.
Right.
And then what I'm gonna start doing now too, because I'm gonna get professional photos on them, is also do the layout of the property.
Mhm.
You know how they do for like listings. I'm pretty sure
Mhm.
they're interested. They'll kind of want to know.
Mhm.
Um,
Right. I rented a house sight unseen to a family who was moving from out of state just using the 3D walkthrough feature that, you can, it's a Matterport, you can scale back and you can see the floor plan, but then you can go in and, I'm like, it's all right here. And it does really give you, you want to make them feel like when they go to the property, there's no surprises.
Yeah,
That sounds
exactly. See,
nice.
that might help you win over the tenant because,
Mhm.
like, hey, this one might look a little bit nicer in the pictures, but they know
Right.
exactly what they're getting in yours, and therefore they
Mhm.
Yeah.
might just move with you for that
Right.
very reason.
So, what kinds of tools have you used to really finesse your management process? Because you manage all of your properties, correct?
Correct.
So, give us any like tips or tricks or softwares or tools or like what's in your little, kit that helps you
So
successfully
from
manage all these properties?
so from the very beginning, like when I first like want to list a property, obviously I use Furnished Finder, see what the comparables are, see what they're doing good, and then you also want to look at the ones that are really good because then you can like, oh man, they did a good job, and
Right.
I should start doing that. And then once you get the people, like I guess, like I said, it's a learning process. So I think videos are really important. I just put it on YouTube so I can just grab it whenever I want to. Um,
Nice.
and so that because that'll help a lot of like, hey, how do I get in? Or another thing too is, hey, the breaker came off, so show them where
Oh,
the
right.
breaker's at, so have that ready to rock and roll. Have a little, just like your whole thing is a little stay of here's the Wi-Fi password, here's the
Right.
where everything's at. I recently started using the software Avail,
Okay.
and it's pretty cool because it just after a while, once you start to scale it, you start realizing like, man, this is a lot because you're like, oh,
Right.
who do I have? I have them paying because it's not always on the first. If they move in on the
Right.
15th, you could prorate it if you want to, or it could just be an odd date that they move in, and so now you
Right.
say, okay, well, we'll just make your first payment on the 10th. Oh, and then you forget, like, hey, does this guy owe me? So on Avail,
Right.
it'll shoot you an email of reminding the tenant, and then it'll also shoot you an email saying, "Hey, your money's been received," and then it'll also let them know too, "Hey, you're gonna get a late fee if you don't send your money in soon."
Hmm.
So it just
I
automatically,
like anything that does the bad guy work for me.
yeah. So that helps a lot.
This
And
is a good
then
time to insert real fast. So he's giving great advice about how to make sure you get your payments on time and stay organized. So don't, for those that aren't familiar with Furnish Finder's business side, KeyCheck, we have the KeyCheck.
Mhm.
We have the KeyCheck credit card and bank payments available now, and
okay.
it's through Stripe and lots of big like
Mhm.
share economy websites. So I think Instacart, things like that. I don't remember for sure which companies, but a lot of big name companies use Stripe. And so
Stripe's a big
one,
guy.
yeah, it's extremely secure because our management team wants to make sure both landlords and travelers are safe and don't get scammed. So it's extremely secure. And if you want to pay with credit card so that you can earn additional travel miles or money back or whatever, then that's available. And compared to, since there's no booking fees for the landlord or the renter through Furnish Finder, the credit card fee 4.95% is nothing in compared to, paying a the percent to other
Yeah, that's a good point. Or if
sites.
they're in a rush to
Yeah.
pay, if they have the card.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I use the
exactly.
key check too to screen the tenants. Sometimes I'm not too
Mm.
sure about
Good.
you guys, but sometimes you get a little pushback for that because they've already been screened through their travel agency.
Right. It's such a different screening, right? Like KeyCheck's going to go in and check for prior evictions and stuff where an employment agency does not care about that. They care about your criminal history. So that is, a big thing that we try to tell everyone. It's like, yeah, I know you've been screened, but this is like screening for your housing, right?
Mhm.
I
But
always
yeah,
use the plural, like we, like it's just kind of
right?
so it's like the company. So I'm like, sorry, like I just had to tell somebody not too long ago, like sorry, like you're unfortunately you're below our credit minimum if you have a
Right.
cosigner or something. Um, and I still do that because I'm like, well, I don't know, in California, there's so many laws for the tenant, so you have to
Right.
be very careful. And I tell them that too, like, hey, why you're pretty tough on this screening. Actually, I'm really not, but I'm just thinking, maybe other states is super easy, and I'm like,
Hmm.
hey, over
Right.
here, we have to do our due diligence because if we get a bad tenant, it's not like, hey, you got to leave tomorrow. It's a whole process, and it takes forever.
Yeah. I mean, there's two really good important points there. I think knowing the state that you're investing in,
Yeah.
whether it's the state you live in or, if you're investing elsewhere, you need to know if the laws, a lot of times the laws will, I don't know if favor is the right word, but like make it more difficult or easy on a landlord if you get in a sticky situation. And the other thing is, like you said, like treating, even if it's just you as a single investor, treating it like a business, because it is, and saying, these
Mhm.
are our policies, right? This is how, like, you don't have to, you don't have to waver in those things if that's how, you know, you want to, prorate things or whatever your policies are, like they're yours.
Yeah, that's super, super important, is not to waver off of your key policies. Because I was a landlord a long time ago, and I learned the hard way. Like, I was trying to get a tenant in really quickly because, like, hey, I don't want to pay this mortgage, and I didn't do
Right.
proper screening, and it ended up costing me, like 5 times as much because I had to
Hmm.
kick them out. They stood forever. The property was a mess,
Oh
and
Mm-hmm.
no.
so you definitely don't want to waiver. Or if you're gonna accommodate, then make sure, like I said, like, hey, we can move forward, but you need a cosigner,
Right.
or
Hmm.
something to cover your
Right.
basis, because it's going to end up biting you in the butt later.
Hmm.
Yep.
Good reminder as well. So, tenant screening, for those that are interested, use Furnished Finder and aren't currently using tenant screening through KeyCheck. It is free to landlords. It's a TransUnion, so everybody knows TransUnion, very secure as well. And it's $39.99 per tenant screening. So, very reasonable.
I did notice that Furnish Finder now has the tenant. I'm not sure what it's called, but where it keeps track of your tenants, but you have to put the data in.
Tenant tracking.
Yeah. So I just started. Before that, I was already putting it on my spreadsheet,
Hmm.
and then the spreadsheet that I have is called Smart Sheets. So
Mm-hmm.
it's just basically a spreadsheet with all the bells and whistles. And I use that because then I could it gives me an alert like, hey, they're a week away from their vacancy,
That's
let
nice.
them know. And then on that spreadsheet, I have their email, their phone number. That way you're like, oh, who do I have on that house? And
Right. Oh, it's this person.
yeah. And then you have what they're paying and what their
Good.
stay is going to be. So it's just a quick glance. So I think that helps a lot too. So make sure I would just to get accustomed, if you have one, to just do that, because if your plan is to do more, you already have the routine versus wait until you have three and then you're like, oh, let me start implementing this.
Right.
Good advice. I'm going to circle back to I'm going to circle back to the ADUs. And so the first thing a lot of people think is garage conversion. Is that going to be a beneficial move when I go to resell my home? So what do you think on in California, being a real estate agent and a lender, about that?
In my opinion, I think it adds more value. Now, it also depends where you're at. If you're in a rural area where, people like to work on their cars and their
Mhm.
garages, then it might not. But if you're like in a suburb area or a city, I think more often than not, it adds value, especially because of the high cost of housing now. In addition
Mhm.
to that, people are having to take care of their parents, and it's a
Mm-hmm.
good way to be able to keep a watchful eye on them, but still have your separation and your time to yourself. And they like it too because they want their own independence as well. So it's a really big thing. I think it adds. You know, I think it's definitely worth the cost of build. Now, some places cost a lot more to build one than others, but at the end of the day, I think you're going to get some ROI on it.
Awesome.
Cool.
Well, thank y'all so much for joining us today. It's been such a great episode. If you are liking our show, please remember to subscribe. You can share the episode with your friends, or if you want to comment and say, hey, I really want to hear more about this topic, then go to YouTube and comment on our YouTube episode. Isaac, we really appreciate it. Thank you for using Furnished Finder, and it's been so great talking to you. And I'm sure I told Dave when we got off the phone on our intro call, I said, hey, we might have a new lender to be able to call. So welcome to Texas soon.
You know who made